welcome everybody. It's another edition of What's Happening in Education and COVID-19, and I'm pleased to have with me Eric Langhorst from the Kansas City area. Eric and I have been connected online for over a decade. I know that. I remember fondly, it was my very first ISTE conference in San Antonio, and I met Eric there, and Eric had already been doing a lot of really interesting work online with his history instruction and a lot of things he was sharing. So been known Eric for a long time. He always does good work. So this was a great chance, excuse, I guess, to get caught up, which is kind of what we're finding a lot. Hey, just getting caught up with people that we may not have been doing much in the last little while. So Eric, why don't you introduce yourself a little more deeply, and then we'll get started chatting.
Okay. My name is Eric Langhorst. I teach in Liberty, Missouri, suburb of Kansas City. This is my 26th year in the classroom. I teach kind of an odd combination of stuff. I do 8th grade U.S. history, and then half the time I also teach 7th and 8th grade computer science. So like teaching kids to code mobile apps. We do some stuff with microbits, things like that. And then I also teach an online high school class for a curriculum that I created called Social Media in Modern Society. So I've done that for the last couple of years, and that's just a typical class that high school students can take as an elective. And we miss a panic, so that was just something that we always offer.
It's interesting as you share those things. It's like you've sort of carved out your own little teaching experience. I know you started as a history teacher, but I know you're involved with technology, sort of probably opened some of those doors for you. So great to be able to sort of take advantage of your strengths and interests. So I guess the first question I always ask people is, here we are, and I don't know how far along this journey. Everybody's in a little bit different spot, but what are you, as a teacher in a couple of different areas, like what are you supposed to be doing right now? What's the mandate of kids in Missouri and yourself in particular?
So we went to spring break. I think it was the 13th of March. So we kind of had that week where we didn't really know what was going to happen, but like everything was happening really quickly. So we had that spring break week, and then we found out that we were going to go to remote learning. And the governor of Missouri officially closed all the schools in Missouri on, I believe, April 9th for the rest of the year. So in some ways, that was almost kind of a relief, I think, for a lot of us, because at first it was just going to be like a 2-week experience. And then we weren't really sure, well, if you're only going to do stuff for 2 weeks, you're going to do stuff different than you would if you're going to be online for the next 7. So once we found that out, then I think everybody could kind of settle in and try and figure out what they were going to do in a remote learning situation. The traditional class that I teach at the high school on social media, that's an online class that's already built. So all the stuff that we do was already created for that. The U.S. history class, right now we're talking about the United States Civil War. There's lots of content there. I have a lot of stuff I can draw on. Probably the more difficult one is the computer science class, because we do basically coding, and then we test it on a tablet that we have in the classroom, a set of tablets. So that's something that's a lot easier to do when you've got a kid shoulder to shoulder and you're trying to help them troubleshoot code or something. So that one's been a little bit more difficult, but we've been one-to-one for, 6 or 7 years. And I know I use Google Classroom as kind of my traditional how we turn stuff in and how I give them a lot of material. So there hasn't been a ton of difference in kind of how we've done stuff. Obviously not being in the classroom and not having a physical situation's been a difficulty, but as far as kind of like the nuts and bolts and routine of like turning stuff in and that kind of stuff, it's been pretty similar. We did have an interesting experience in late February. We kind of, in Missouri, they changed some laws on how they can consider seat time and learning. We don't have a ton of snow days. I know talking to somebody from Canada, we talk about snow days and you guys probably laugh at us. We have probably more ice days than snow days, but there've been some situations the last couple of years where we've had a lot of those. So last year, Department of Education in Missouri allowed schools to come up with some plans for virtual snow days. And so once we reached a certain number of days, we kicked into that virtual snow day situation. So we did have a day in February where we had curriculum planned and things were ready. And I think in some ways that kind of helped our parents and students and teachers to kind of know what it might look like to have a virtual situation, even though it was only for one day. So I think that helped us a lot too.
So is the expectation though that teaching and learning and instruction and particularly new learning will carry on, or is there breaks put on that as far as testing and assessment and evaluation and such? What's that message?
Yeah, so there hasn't been a lot from like the state down as far as kind of how they want each district to do that. In our own individual district, we had a policy come out last week that said that students are going to be held, whatever they had at the end of the third quarter, their grade could not go down from that,
Right.
but students could continue to work on stuff and their grade could improve. So it's kind of a catch-22, but we do have some students that have some situations where they're not able to possibly get on the internet, or just, gosh, I think of all the situations with kids where they might be taking care of 5 or 6 siblings, or maybe their parents just lost a job. So we're trying to kind of walk that delicate balance of, we want learning to continue, but we're not going to punish a kid if they don't have the same advantages that some of our other students have. So that's been our policy. I'm still doing work with my students. I've had a lot of engagement with my students. I would say like 80% of my students are turning in work, and I do a daily video, just kind of, tell them what's happening and maybe tell a joke or two and just kind of be corny about it. We've done some Zoom calls. So the engagement's been pretty good from my students. We've got a lot of advantages. Our students are one-to-one, pretty affluent district. I think that we have, quite good connectivity as far as like internet access and things like that. So for the most part, we've kind of just carried on with what we've been doing as far as what our normal topics would have been.
And again, that it's really speaking to those districts who have invested in technology, and it's creating just less stress for people in that position. So it's paying off for sure at this point. What about from that leadership perspective, and knowing that you rely a lot on your district as opposed to perhaps a state or obviously any kind of federal messaging. But what have you appreciated from leadership as far as what they have said to teachers or parents or whomever about how to deal with this situation?
Yeah, so I've been super happy with how our administration and just our district level people have, basically told us, take care of relationships first, make sure that you are doing what you need to for your family. They have not done, I mean, I've seen some districts where it's, gosh, like this is the schedule per minute and
Right.
you got to do this. And our district has not done that. We have a faculty meeting as a building every week where we do a Zoom call. That's been great. My principals have called me every couple days just to basically chat and just say like, hey, how you doing? Anything that, we can do to help you. We have a counselor that sometimes comes and works with our students as well as our faculty. So we had just like a counseling Zoom the other day for our staff in our building, where we just basically talked through like, how are you feeling? What are you experiencing as as a person, not necessarily as a teacher? And so I felt like they've been very proactive in making sure that we're thinking about those things first and content and curriculum second. Knowing that that's also going to be there. I think that there's quite a few students that they want that. I'm hearing from students saying, hey, we're doing the assignments. Is there anything like extra little activity I can do just because I want to be able to do something? But our district's really focused on the person more than content, I think.
And that I keep hearing that message. Like I don't know that I've ever been more proud of education on a larger scale, because it's not where, oh, it's pockets. We talk about pockets all the time, whether it's innovation or culture or whatever. I'm seeing and I've again been interviewing a lot of people. I'm seeing this same message being really hammered home in many ways. So I don't know what you're going to say, obviously, but I'm just so encouraged when I do hear people say that it's about the people first. Like, make sure you take care of you take care of yourself too, right? Like, you're taking care of other people, but teachers are dealing with this, in the same ways. One of the things I think is interesting, of course, is just this new routine life that people are experiencing, and try to process the good and the bad of it all. What about from a like just a daily routine? When it hits you, like, well, okay, this is really weird. This what I'm doing right now. Like, what has been those moments for you that have kind of caught you off guard, saying this is not the way things normally work, good or bad or otherwise?
Um, well, I mean, I just think the whole way that people think about time and space is going to be so different after this. Um, I mean, so much of what we do is just because we've done it for the last 100 years that way, and just you can't change it. But like, I'll have a class or something, or be working on a project, take a 15-minute break, and go play with my dog outside or whatever. I mean, just weird stuff like that. Whereas a teacher, I think we're so locked into schedules and routines, and there's like a rhythm to what you do each day and each week. So just being able to, like, I mean, it sounds dumb, but like,
No.
I'm going to go get a cup of coffee, for 10, 15 minutes and come back. And just the way that, I think being able to take those breaks has allowed me to then come back and really focus in a different way than if I just had 7 class periods in a row. Um, we've talked as a district a lot in the last year, actually, about how we're going to maybe change some things with time and space. And like, I've been thinking a lot about when people talk about having students have more individualized learning. Sometimes they on, hey, I want to spend more time during my on math because I'm not good at math, and I could spend a little bit extra time on something that I'm not good at. But I've also thought a lot about, when we come back, what if a student really wants to go into broadcasting? We have a broadcasting class. What if you spent a little extra time on broadcasting during your day instead of just the traditional 40-minute class period or whatever? And just trying to, when we come back from this, really like meet the needs of our students in different ways, so that we're not just working them through that cog of the industrial, I got 45 minutes here, and then when I move classes. And I think that in a lot of ways, this will probably have some really big benefits as far as how people think about those things. And it takes something this big, I think, for education to do that, since it's such a big ship to turn around. But it's a horrible thing, but I'm also excited about maybe the different ways that people might look at how we do traditional structures.
That's a really interesting point, and I hadn't thought of that idea of the way we think of time, because as you've said, we've talked a lot about like how do we make education more personal, and kids have had a hard time, I think, engaging in that conversation because they've really only known one way that school has been. And educators too, we hopefully as adults have some opportunities to think beyond that. But I always think kids, like when you ask kids like what do you want school to be, like how can they even answer that question, because like this is what it is, right? So I don't necessarily find kids to be great advocates for that, not because of anything other than the fact they don't have enough experience. This, however,
Yeah,
might be interesting in the sense that kids are coming back and say, you know what, Mr. Langhorst, I found that if I work for an hour, or if I take a break, or if whatever, however they've sort of crafted out their learning, that I really learned well in this environment, or whatever it
exactly.
is, right? So I think, yeah, I think the time to have that conversation and include kids as part of it is going to be one opportunity that we don't want to waste, because um, they are dealing with the same thing now, and so their perspectives, I think, are going to have a lot more weight than they might have if they're just coming from, I only know how school works in my own world, right? So
Right, right. I think it's been really interesting too to think about the timing of when this happened. We've talked about this as a staff quite a bit. Obviously, when we come back, hopefully in the fall, one, we're going to have a plan for what if there's some kind of resurgence
right.
of this, and we're going to have to move back to a remote learning situation. I was with my students for 3/4 of the year, so it's a completely different ball game for us here in North America, where we've had that. If I had to start a year with remote learning, I mean, that would be so difficult, because when I'm dealing with a student now and I'm answering an email, or I'm responding to them on Google Classroom, I've got that experience of knowing how they're going to probably react, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. But gosh, can you imagine, like, we have a middle school where we have 6, 7, 8. Can you imagine being a 6th grader and going from an elementary situation
Wow.
to a middle school? and you're starting with the remote learning situation, that would be crazy.
Yeah, and that's what, like when I talk to the people in Australia, their school year started in January, so yeah, they've had some contact, but they haven't had a chance to build up, any sense of real depth and community and relationships that we have had in North America because of when our school year started. So yeah, there's a lot to think about in that way. And again, um, uh, some of the timing of this, not that there was ever good timing, but there may have actually been some blessings if this was going to happen at this time of the school year to, number one, take away a lot of the testing requirements, and not to have a big long extended period of time away. So lots of interesting process. So last question I'll ask you, Eric, then is if this were to continue in some way, shape, or form, what are you concerned about in terms of, like, this is the thing that I don't know that we've actually wrapped our head around in terms of how this, or the lasting impacts in any other way around the epidemic.
Um, I mean, probably just the whole aspect of making relationships with students. I'm thinking of students that I know really need that school contact. Um, and not necessarily even something where it's like they have a horrible home life, but just that like they need that another adult in their life to just be able to, talk to, or, have a relationship. So my major concern is if we, this carries on, how do we create those things that are, if you call them soft skills or whatever, but there's so much you can do online, but there's still not going to be that aspect of having like a conversation and showing empathy and things like that. So how do we create that in an online environment if we have to move to more remote learning? Or what if we, have to do a blended type thing? What if some states have talked about maybe on alternating days, we have some students come to school and other students, are at home that day and then rotate. What does that look like? How are we able to build like consistency? And there's just so many things to think about. I've been
Hmm.
keeping a journal, and I've encouraged my students to keep a journal, and just, on different days, writing down thoughts about, how are we going to look differently at this, whether it's education or it's, what we buy, how we cook our food, how we prepare our food, just all these different kinds of things that are just completely unknown. And it amazes me, like, you don't even think about them. And then all of a sudden, we're on day, whatever, 30 something. And you're like, oh my gosh, I wonder what this is going to look like if this continues another couple weeks. I mean, I'm probably going to need to get a haircut eventually. Like, I just like all these weird things that you don't even imagine. But in a school setting, I think that building relationships, how do we do that in a more online environment, is going to be a major thing. My sixth grade daughter just had lunch with 70 students at her middle school. A couple of teachers arranged a Zoom call, and 70 students,
Yeah.
sixth graders, showed up to eat lunch. And I mean, she was so excited to be able to see
Yeah.
her friends. How do we replicate that in that kind of environment?
Yeah. And I think, again, that's my hope, is that, like, I love the fact that you've got yourself and your students journaling this, because uh, the danger is that we lose the the emotion behind some of these conversations moving forward, and we forget, because I don't know that anybody actually, I mean, we talk about going back to normal, but I think people are seeing enough potential, enough uh, good things that are happening as a result of this, that nobody probably wants to go back to exactly the way it was before. Like, we
Right.
want to return, we certainly want those freedoms back, no question, but there's a lot here that we want to maintain and figure out, like this relationship bit. How do we sort of double down on it in a face to face, or on whatever environment it is, that we say, what, that was really what was important. We did a great job of that. We, better connections with parents, students, and so forth. Well, why would we wait for a pandemic to make that just embedded into our work? And it's probably feeding off of already established cultures around things that people believe. It's not like people didn't believe that relationships are important. We just now see it more clearly, like, wow, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really a thing. It's not just lip service that we paid to this. So
Right. When so many
I'm
people are talking about their, like, their families, how much time you're spending with your family, and it's like, why why did I not do this before? And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people commenting on like what people are noticing during this pause that they're going to want to basically make sure that they keep once we go back to whatever the next normal type of thing
Right.
is.
Well, we'll reconvene in a year from now. Hopefully, we'll have a lot more to say about what did stick and what didn't stick and what should have stick and what and all of those things. So, anyways, thanks, Eric, for taking the time to do this. It's always interesting to hear, and I appreciate your perspectives on this and the work that you do as a teacher. And just thank you for doing that for kids over these years.
Well, thanks, Dean. I love all your work, and it was great to reconnect, and we'll have to do this again.
Absolutely. Cheers.
All right. Thanks, Dean.